Just paddling out in the big surf is total commitment.
You can't just call time out and stroll on into the beach if you don't like the way things are going. So what's the biggest? Waimea?
Ridden?
Yeah.
Kaha. Gain a point.
Bells Beach, Australia.
Whoa. No way Bells is bigger than Waimea, bro.
We'll be next year.
Odie believes the 50-year storm is coming next year.
50-year storm. What's that?
That's kind of a legend.
No, it's real. It's absolutely real. Everything moves in cycles. So twice a century, the ocean lets us know just how small we really are. A winter storm comes out of Antarctica, tearing up the Pacific. And it sends a huge swell north 2,000 miles. And when it hits Bells Beach, it'll turn into the biggest surf this planet has ever seen, and I will be there.
So will I.
If you want the ultimate, you gotta be willing to pay the ultimate price. It's not tragic to die doing what you love.
That's how I want to go.
Hell, I ain't gonna live to see 30.
What does it mean to be tragic? What does it mean to suffer? While I don't think it's a great film, Point Break delivers on these two key points. A solid ending to an otherwise par-for-the-course movie, but it answers these questions, right? And it's in that kind of solution to these problems. It saves Point Break. To be Apollonian is to be the truth personified, and in a sense, it's always doomed to be corrupted, the truth. It's a doomed mission one has to uphold the truth, but counterintuitively, it's a life of leisure and poetry. I mean, what does the truth have to fear or be afraid of, right? It has like infinite amount of time to build itself out and reveal itself, and it can't be, ambushed or caught in this gotcha moment, right? There's no real risk to just pure truth. To live your life honestly without regrets is a tragedy, though. It's a tragedy to believe in the truth, that you're willing to die to achieve that singular moment, right? That poetic death, to be Apollonian. And conversely, to be Dionysian is to suffer, to languish, to extend death, to misinform fate, to deceive and prolong the mysteries, not seek to end them and in that end die. Sure, there's suffering in that end to die, but you at least reach an end, right? And because Odysseus, he doesn't die. He suffers, and he'll continue to suffer, right? You can add on to the suffering of Odysseus. You can make another Odyssey, right? Achilles is dead. There's no bringing him back. To rely on tricks and cunning, right? Odysseus has to just dig himself out of whatever hole he has got himself in, or that he's languishing in. He's one of self-doubt and regret. To suffer is to live. To die is a tragedy. And that beautiful death, to live forever, right? In the beginning of the film Point Break, we are introduced to the main character, FBI agent Johnny Utah, who we can identify as Judah from the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. And along with that, we can recognize him as Oneus from the Greek mythology, where Judah was the son of Jacob and the progenitor for the line of David that will eventually produce Jesus Christ, right? And Oneus from the Greek myths was the one who introduced wine to Greece, was said to receive the vine from Dionysius as a gift. And Apollodorus explains this divine visit of Dionysius, who ultimately is said to be the father of Danaera, this daughter of, or result of the coupling with Althea, who was the wife of Oeneus. So here's the divine visit. From Apollodorus' Bibliotheca, it's Book 1, Chapter 8, Section 1. Reigning over Calydon, Oeneus was the first to receive divine plant from Dionysus. He married Althea, daughter of Thestius, and begat daughter Danaera, who is said to have been begotten on Althea by Dionysus. This Danaera drove a chariot and practiced the art of war, and Heracles wrestled for her hand with Archelaus. Through this visit, we can link Judah and Dionysus, and likewise Oeneus as the vine, or symbol of the vine, where Danaera is the daughter of Dionysus and Althea, and then the result of that is that Oeneus is symbolized by this vine, or winemaking. In addition, we can link Judah with Heracles, as Heracles is Jacob, or better known as Israel. So he's the father of Judah. With that fact being so, it follows that the 12 labors of Heracles represent the 12 children of Jacob. And I made a video explaining how Judah represents the first labor of Heracles, the slaying of the Nemean lion, and presenting this pelt to the king Eurystheus. And all this is to say that the killing of the Nemean lion serves as allegory for the harmful effects of alcoholism or just any type of addiction, right? Like an opiate addiction, where once again Judah represents the vine along with the Greek Dionysius and Oeneus. And of course it's Judah in Genesis 49 who is said to tie his donkey to the vine and his colt to the choicest branch, where the donkey could be said to be the Apollonian figure Bodhi. In the movie Point Break, there's a figure Bodhi who's like a guru. He's like the surfer guru who's like the Apollonian figure, the personification of truth and poetry. But he's ultimately blinded, right? He can't see the truth in the end, or maybe it's not to the end, right, that he figures it out, right? He could be corrupted by this alcohol or Judah-like figure, and conversely, it's the cult. Conversely, the cult is Johnny Utah, right? Because in the beginning of the film, on his first day, Johnny's fiery boss at the FBI busts his balls, right? He calls him Johnny Unitas, who's like the famous quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, right? So it's a reference to Genesis 49, where the branch he wishes to tie his colt to is Tyler, right? And Tyler is the friend of Bodhi. Tyler is the female lead, and she's a tomboyish surfer girl who Judah uses to get close to Bodhi and his surfer crew, right? Because Judah is an undercover FBI agent. And we can identify Tyler as Deianira, the daughter of Dionysius and Althea. And in Hebrew mythos, we can equate Deianira with Tamar, right, the daughter-in-law of Judah, who he, of course, sleeps with as her identity is obscured under a veil. And it's a little ambiguous, but I think Tamar was dressed as so she couldn't see Judah's identity, and neither Judah could see hers, right? So essentially both are blinded to the identity of each other, and thus they agreed to have sex for money. So Judah and Tamar agreed to terms in exchange for sex. Judah will pay his daughter-in-law a goat for sex, which eventually leaves her pregnant with his child. And one of the most prevalent themes or motifs in Hebrew mythology is to hide in plain sight or have this crypsis. And most famously, Joseph hides his identity from his brothers while in Egypt. And in Genesis 38, Judah and his daughter-in-law essentially are hiding in plain sight, right? But they're said, right, they're like blinded. Her eyes and face are covered. Furthermore, the blinding or obscuring one's vision is probably an allegory for, like, this impairment of alcohol or indecisiveness, the vine we associate with Judah. In addition to the kind of the mysterious nature of Judaism, Judaism and Dionysus. Moreover, Tamar means palm tree, or just a tree or post in general, where the post or palm tree could be what Judah is said to tie his colt or donkey to. And Hebrew can mean like the free market, right? A place to bring your goods, like sell your wine in the market of the local polis or town, where the palm tree being a symbol of Hermes or Mercury, right? This literal medium of the market. In addition, maybe or conversely, just kind of dual nature, we can think the palm tree could represent Apollo, right? And his birth in Delos, where the mother Leto was suspended in midair on the palm tree, right? It's just like there's a little bit of symmetry or dichotomy, and depending on the moralization, one is like good or bad, right? The story of Judah and Tamar is from Genesis 38. So let's read. Judah and Tamar. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hirah. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son named Onan. She gave birth still to another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. All that, Judah met the daughter of Shua, and where Shua means to sink, right? It's like to sink in the water, to crouch down. And Judah had a child with the daughter of Shua, and the child or the son is called where the name means wild ass, aroused, to strip, and also to blind. And it's a lot, but it all kind of makes sense when watching the movie Point Break, as well as reading Genesis 38 in its entirety. And this reminds me of Reuben, who's the son of Judah, who's said to rise up into his father's couch, right? He's to say shu and maybe is to imply to rise up in this kind of like virile or aroused state from the water, or this crouched position. It's also kind of like Judah in Genesis 49 as well, right? This kind of lioness or lion who's said to be crouching down. So again, reading more. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the children would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. So Judah had another son, Onan, who means either sorrow or vigor. So I interpret it's like to live and suffer or die with vigor. So you can either live and suffer or you could die with vigor, right? And there's something to an individual's life, and that's up to one to live, right? I'm not going to tell anyone really I'm not going to force anyone to do anything, and I can only provide inspiration, right? And even if you don't have kids, you can achieve glory through just principles. Apollo is a princely god, whereas Dionysian is the kinglier god. Not to say one is better than the other. I mean, well, I'll say one is better than the other, but it's not. This is not kind of a quantitative fact right here, right? But the fact is, kings don't rule, right? The markets rule more than any king on earth. And ultimately, it's Zeus who rules, right? God rules all. We don't really know how the universe works. We don't know every outcome to every event. And the kings or politics is just there to divide in half, or just give to the least common denominator where you can make some kind of calculation, right? And Dionysus or Judah is the personification of that divisive, confusing, tormenting medium of ruling men. What it takes to actually rule men is to herd them, right? And this is not to associate infertility with Apollo. It's just the opposite, right? Because if you take the cursory look at Wikipedia, Apollo fathered many times more children than that of Dionysus, right? Because, well, to suffer is not attractive. To be confident, decisive, youthful, pure, virile, that's poetry, right? Poetry gets the girls ultimately, and that requires a clear mind and vision. But it also probably, I think there's like a little bit more to it that you kind of have to be, you have to be sober to get aroused, right? To be virile. You can't just always be drunk. So like Achilles gets Briseis back, and Agamemnon never even gets to touch her, right? Homer gives Achilles the glorious death of tragedy. Everyone wants to be Achilles, not Agamemnon, the great divider, Pluto, the snake that bites Eurydice, right? In reverse, think about how much censorship Moses has to introduce for his name to be known, right? Moses is like Agamemnon, but we know Moses, but it comes at the end of these like 10 commandments, all this censorship, right? There's some sense of like censorship in the Iliad, but it's not like anybody's name is blotted out, right? Right, we're not left not even knowing the pharaoh's name, like who's the pharaoh, but we know who Achilles is, right? We have a name for him, or he's more of a person than the pharaoh is, because there's more than one pharaoh, right? Reading further, before I say that, there's something to that. There's a singularity to Achilles, right? He's one person, whereas the pharaoh is just like this. Well, he's just like this cog or whatever, a person in the herd, right, of many. Reading further, Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household, where in Hebrew the name Shelah comes from the verb shalal, means to extract, mostly in the sense of plunder. So the noun Shelah means plunder. It also can mean barefoot. And after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died, and when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on the way to Timnah to shear sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. And we can link the last name of Tyler, the female character, where her last name is Endicott, with the Hebrew word Enaim, which means like two fountains or two eyes, or it's, again, more symbolism of the eyes and vision as well as water. And Timah is like a lot or portion that one is assigned, right? Probably of this plunder that it was discussed, Shalah, that was, right? She's coming for her lot in life, or her plunder. And when Judah reading further, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not really realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. So then, in Genesis 38, the daughter... So to summarize, right, in Genesis 38, the daughter Tamar strips out of her widow clothes, and it's kind of like this pun for fleecing a sheep, and she switches into a veil, blinding Judah to her identity, right? And she tricks him to pay for sex. And of course, there's like this water vaginal symbolism, as well as this kind of like virile fertility. And it's kind of like probably juxtaposed to this alcoholism or being blinded. Moreover, Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, this orphan, or basically a widow of like Tyler in Point Break. And Tyler represents kind of this feisty and warrior-like spirit of Daenerys, right? The girl Achelos wrestled Heracles with over her love, right? Much like Jacob's struggle with some kind of ghost or angel in the river in Genesis 32, right? Where Jacob injures his hip. And both Heracles and Jacob are associated with wrestling in rivers, right? And I think in getting like injured as a result. And you could say Achilles too, where Achilles fights the river god Xanthos, and it's Achilles who ends up being associated with the nagging injury or the Achilles heel, right? So it could just be part of epic myth in general, right? The structure of it. And going with that, it's Paris or Apollo, depending on the mythographer, that ends up killing Achilles with an arrow in his heel. And of course, Apollo is Apollo, but Paris is like David. He's like of the line of Judah. So there's kind of a symmetry or asymmetry there, right? There's a dichotomy to the myths, and it's more like an abstraction or a matrix. It's up to one to kind of manipulate, to bring form or structure to the myth, resulting in a meaning or a moralization, right? A result to this kind of like mathematical operation. What's good and what's bad, basically. Although pure computer logic seems to reveal a bias or just kind of realness or tangibility of truth that some of us have tapped into, right? And it's like suggests that there's going to be a rise of cyborgs, and it's not pure robots that are going to rule the world, right? You need to add a little bit of Dionysian, this irrationality of suffering to the human. That's like the nature of to be a human, or to be herdable, or to lead or bend or ply people. Tyler also represents Artemis, the sister of Apollo, the huntress, and a goddess of the bow. She's feisty too, right? She's a fighter. And in the Greek myth, she is an orphan. I think that's, like, again, this kind of like symmetry. Apollo kills the snake python, this kind of Yahweh or Judah-like figure. The moon also represents Artemis. And in the movie, it's the ass. Again, this donkey, or it's also the moon, right? That finally gets Orion or Bodhi caught by the FBI, or at least makes Judah or this Johnny Utah character suspect Bodhi, right? He suspects Bodhi because of the mooning, or this kind of like symbol of Artemis, thus leaving him to be kind of tragically swallowed up by the wave at the end of the movie. And, thus we can kind of relate this to the overall to the Orion myth. We can relate Yahweh or Saturn to Enlil with the number 50. And this like once in a 50-year storm that Bodhi rides out into this, Bodhi rides out to his assumed death. You don't know it. He's like Achilles, but we got to assume he dies. And at that moment, it's like the unblinding of the Judah-like character, where we can identify Bodhi as like the tragic Apollonian, the sun that provides clarity. And the poetry is kind of like the sport of surfing. And and the eventual 1 in a 50-year giant wave is kind of this symbol for Orion, or like this Sumerian Ninurta, who was associated kind of again with Saturn, or Achilles, right, or Arthur, this kind of tragic hero. Where on the other hand, Judah is kind of like Odysseus, right? He's the survivor, he's the anti-hero, he's Dionysian. Enlil and Yahweh are related to 50, though I'm not sure why. Perhaps it's like the orbit of both Jupiter and Saturn, where the orbit of Saturn, from the perspective of Earth relative to the Sun in our orbit, it takes roughly 30 years, and then Jupiter takes about 20 years, similar to the time it takes the Iliad and Odyssey to complete, or like Odysseus to make it back to Ithaca. His total journey, right? If you combine the Iliad and Odyssey, it takes 20 years. So the Cimmerian Ninurta, or he's kind of like this Yahweh or Saturn figure, is kind of like Orion in my mind. That Orion kind of encompasses both the hero and the anti-hero, the Christ and the Antichrist, right? He's like the perfect storm, this poetic death of the tragic Apollonian, in tandem with the languishing, indecisive suffering of the Dionysian. So Bodhi, the Apollonian, is the leader of the bank robbing crew. He only strikes in the summer, right? He only comes in the summer, the high time or the solstice of the yearly return of the Apollonian from the chill of the Dionysian winter months. From past videos, I've linked Apollo with the tribe of Benjamin from the Hebrew Bible, in particular the book of Genesis, where Mercury is represented by the tribe of Joseph, or better yet, there's like a combination of them, right? I.e., the tribe of Manasseh, and that represents kind of the caducean of the Mercurial and Apollonian elements of Olympian mythology, right? That we kind of consider them both together, or they're separate but they're also together, right? This combining of the tribe of Benjamin and Joseph, where they both exhibit kind of similar attributes, or that once again that we consider the myth as just kind of an abstraction, or this manipulative like field or coordinate system that has kind of like axes or symmetry that we can move around or rotate or manipulate with these kind of mathematical operations. Producing a result or a solution or a meaning or a moralization. The myth of Hermes is the creation of a market, or maybe the opposite, that Apollo, like Benjamin, is the is the big bad wolf, right? He's the bank robber, stealing from the banks of the U.S. reserves. Bodhi could also represent, in general, Orion, or more accurately, the star of Ceres, which is associated with the constellation Orion, where Ceres is the rising of the dog star, right? Ceres we associate with also the warrior god Achilles. Achilles is said to resemble the star of Ceres in the Iliad, right? When he comes out to fight Hector, he's said to be like the fastest person that anyone ever saw, right? Achilles waited his whole life for this moment, and he zooms out to the plain to meet Homer, right? He's not to meet Hector. He's not going to leave anything to chance. So he's decisive. There's no regrets. Total confidence. Homer compares him to the brightest star in the sky, right? Ceres for a reason. Achilles dies immortal, a prince. He wakes up in Elysium, a hero, immortal. More specifically, the rise of the star Ceres was used to signal the yearly flood of the Nile, and also, just in general, a way to track the solar year by the ancients, and in particular the Egyptians, right? Because they relied on the flooding of the Nile, and this is why we call it the dog days of summer, because the rising of the Ceres is kind of the end of the summer, and its association with kind of famine and barrenness. Also, the war on the, or no, that it coincides kind of with these dog days of summer, or our I think our calendars are not on, right? Like if you live in like a northern kind of these northern climates or northern latitudes, your sense of seasons is not like on the Nile, right? Especially, who knows what it was like thousands of years ago. So like the dog days of summer are like they're before the Nile floods, or this kind of, you're gonna get this harvest, or it's the end. It's like you're on your last you're on your last whatever, your last buck, and you're about to strike it rich though, and hence its name and its association with famine and barrenness. Also kind of like Achilles, right? This war is dragging on, and he's kind of like his last farewell, right? Achilles' Aristeia moment in Book 21 of the Iliad we associate with the dog days of summer and the flooding, but also we associate it with the flooding and depositing of mineral and nutrient-rich sediment on the Nile Delta, which allowed Egypt to be the breadbasket of the world, right? Essentially for millennia is all this constant yearly depositing of this mineral-rich sediment. And this allowed them to generate other markets, right? Which is kind of a common thread in the book of Genesis, right? Like, you know how the Hebrews always head to Egypt in a famine for grain, right? Abraham does it. Jacob does it. I argue the flooding of the rivers we can associate with Poseidon, right? The god of the sea in Greek mythology. In addition to the Hebrew figure of Reuben, who is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, where the name Reuben is a combination of two words. The first part comes from the verb ra'ah, meaning to see or understand, and the second part of the name Reuben is the word ben, meaning son or offspring, and altogether it means behold the son, or son of vision, or son who's seen. So this reminds me of the myth of Orion, right? He's the hunter who's said to be blinded, and then he's healed by the sun, and Poseidon is the father of Orion, or Orion is the son of Poseidon. And it's like a play on words, I think, where the sun is also sun, right? Where Ben in Hebrew means sun. But I think it refers to the sun like Apollo, who is also the son of God, right? So it's like these play on words or these homophones, right? That works also in English. You have sun, S-U-N, but also son, S-O-N. And Reuben means to behold the sun, so it's sun, S-O-N, or maybe it could be S-U-N, as in like Orion can see after seeing the sun, or that he is the son of Poseidon, the son who can now see after seeing the sun, S-U-N. And we might also have to wonder if C and C, as in S-E-E and C-S-E-A, are also kind of homophones like they are in English, or they're homophones in Hebrew like they are in English, right? Whereas where the son of seeing is like the son of the sea, right? Like the son of Poseidon is the son of the sea. Furthermore, Reuben is like the first son of Judah, where means the wilds or the aroused state, right? I say this because Reuben is the one that sleeps with Jacob's concubine, and he's punished for it. He represents also the partner of Johnny Utah, right? This Papas Angelos, because Reuben also is associated with like angel, or the Hebrew word for angel. And in general, Reuben and water are one of the main themes in Point Break. Point Break, right? Used to signify the kind of medium or wild, virile, and uncontrollable nature of the sea, but also kind of a sexual symbol of fertility, sexual arousal in the vagina or womb in general, right? This birthing process is very, it's very wet. Where Reuben is also in addition, Reuben is also associated with mandrakes, right? The story goes Reuben, the oldest son of Leah, found some mandrakes to trade with Jacob in order for Jacob to have sex with Leah and not Rachel, right? And the roots of the plant were used to help women conceive, right? They can help with fertility. And you find them in the late spring or early summer, the time of the Shavuot or Pentecost, which was when the time of the wheat harvest. So it seems that, Reuben can also be related to the wheat harvest of early summer, and maybe he's also related. But then again, I don't know. I don't know how to relate some of these summers or these seasons because one, we live in a lot higher climates than like Egypt, where a lot of these myths come out of, where they rely on the sun and the rising of Ceres, right? And their calendars might not necessarily line up with us. But in general, the rising of the dogs coincides with the flooding of the Nile, or the end of this kind of famine, and it's kind of, in general, the seasonal nature of the Apollonian surf game that comes and robs banks during the summer, right? They arrive in the summer and then they end at the end of the summer. Furthermore, in Genesis, it's the son Joseph who goes to Egypt after being sold by his brother into slavery, right? So they fake his death, or they tell Jacob the father that Joseph has died, and in reality he's been sold into slavery and he ends up in Egypt. And this kind of, right, this is like the brothers have blood on their hands, and it's Judah and Reuben among the culprits, right? right? They have blood on their hands. It's a blood libel. Judah, being a clueless figure, and Reuben is kind of this concerned and wily figure. And right, and this tells us a little bit about Judah and Reuben, right? Where Judah is this clueless figure, and Reuben is a concerned, brotherly figure, right? Or an uncle-like figure. Because I say this because Poseidon is the Greek god of the sea, but in Rome, or in Latin, he's known as Neptune. Where I surmise Neptune is like nepotism or nephew, or he's to be a good brother or uncle, right? Where Reuben is concerned for Joseph, as opposed to Judah, the Dionysian, who's kind of ambivalent with his, well, he's got like his head up his ass, right? This is kind of like, again, his ass, this donkey symbolism. The whole time he doesn't know what to say, right, with regards to Joseph. Like, even after visiting him in Egypt, he's like, oh, I don't know what to say. He's totally indecisive. To be Dionysian is to suffer, right, in your indecisiveness or actions. To be regretful, to live with, like, this bad hangover. And that's why I don't know why people would ever choose kind of this Dionysian. But it's not really something we choose. We kind of submit to it in our suffering, right? We give in to Christianity to save us. And whereas, like, Apollonian, it's up to us, right? We have to be sober-minded. But we're also kind of pure-hearted gentlemen. Or to be Apollonian is to be a gentleman, right? It's to be decisive in your actions, confident you've kind of taken the right decision, right? To be a gentleman is to be nice up to a point. But after that, well, once you've crossed the line, you're going to pay the consequences, right? You're going to suffer. You're going to be the one who suffers. Anyways, moving on. It's not just the wheat that's being sold, I argue, right? That Reuben, yeah, he's tied in with this kind of wheat harvest and this kind of signaling of the flooding of the Nile when the harvest or whatever starts or ends. And that when, I think it's more than that, when that Jacob buys wheat in Egypt, I think he could also be purchasing poppy or trafficking opiates, right? This could be due to the use of homophones, where to see, or the word for eye in Greek is formed from the root of opium or op, right? Op. In addition, like juice, like from a grape, also has the root op. Like, for example, to be drunk is onopian, where onaeus is vine, and opium, I think, is like a juice, or it sounds similar to like a juice, or to squeeze out a juice. And it's also like vision, like an eye, or it could even mean like opium, right? This OP. And it's kind of like in Point Break, right, that they botched that raid, right? And they thought they had the bank robbers, but they really got drug dealers, right? They got these guys who the DEA were investigating, right? They got confused in these homophones. I'll read now from Apollodorus' Bibliotheca, describing the myth of Orion, who was blinded by Onopion. He's been made drunk on wine, or maybe even opiates, and he's blinded, and then he's healed by the sun, returning his vision. And, of course, Orion is the son of the sea god Poseidon, where Orion has the power to walk on water. In general, I think he represents the hurricane season, so he's like the end of the hurricane season, more importantly, in that he marks the start of the sailing season. And again, there's similar sounding words of sea, S-E-E and S-E-A, and also I, or opium and juice and drunkenness, and then there's also sun and sun, right, or S-O-N and S-U-N. So here again, I'll read from Apollodorus' Bibliotheca. It's Book 1, Chapter 4, Section 3. And Artemis slew Orion and Delos. They say that he was of gigantic stature and born of the earth, but Pherecydes said that he was a son of Poseidon and Euryale. Poseidon bestowed on him the power of striding across the sea. He first married Psyche, whom Hera cast into Hades because she rivaled herself in beauty. Afterwards he went to Chios and wooed Merope, daughter of Onopion. But Onopion made him drunk, put out his eyes as he slept, and cast him on the beach. But he went to the smithy of Hephaestus, and snatching up a lad, set him on his shoulders, and bade him lead him to the sunrise. Being come thither, he was healed by the sun's rays, and having recovered his sight, he hastened with all speed against Onopion. And then if you read further into Apollodorus' Bibliotheca, the first book, you'll see that Poseidon has a house built under the sea by Hephaestus, the smithy god, which could represent the FBI, right? Hephaestus represents kind of like the FBI, or the technological ability to conduct this kind of secret investigation, right? this undercover nature of the FBI, the agency. In addition to this, like, it shows you how shady they are, right? They have to keep their investigations under the surface, right? Hephaestus has to build Poseidon or Reuben or this Papa Angelo's character a base under the sea, right, undercover. And they manipulate people with kind of fake stories and sexuality, alcohol, and drugs. And they do this by technological means, right? This ability to sift through data. And it results in people like Tyler, like this orphan with, poor girl with post-traumatic stress disorder who gets sucked into, she gets sucked into this like FBI plot, right? This Artemis character who kind of acts in revenge and kills Orion, right? Or has Apollo kill him. So, again, moreover, the Greek myths are a little different than the Hebrew myths in their treatment of Artemis and Apollo, where Artemis is made a virgin, right? Leto is not killed or estranged from them. And Apollo is a good brother and son in that he kills the Python. And some say he even kills Orion to protect his sister, right, Artemis, in her honor. Whereas Tamar is a prostitute, right? She ends up sleeping with her father-in-law, Judah. Also, we can associate the deposit or vault of Poseidon made by Hephaestus as like this treasure chest, right? We associate with lost and sunken boats that have been swallowed up by Poseidon in a huge wave, and they've been relegated to the bottom of the ocean. Or also like the movie title, The Point of the Waves. It's kind of like the point of the waves, right, that are breaking. It could be an explanation of the oceanographic formations, right, that create a wave, right, that you need to have like this kind of point where the waves break, and then it's kind of maybe this deposit at the bottom of the sea that creates the waves. So let's read further from Apollodorus, from Book 1, Section 4, or Book 1, Chapter 4, Section 4. But for him Poseidon had made ready a house under the earth constructed by Hephaestus, and Dawn fell in love with Orion, and carried him off and brought him to Delos. For Aphrodite caused Dawn to be perpetually in love, because she had bedded with Ares. In addition, it could be that when Angelo Papas is, or Papas Angelos, is it Papas Angelos? Angelo Papas. In addition, it could be that when Angelo Papas is diving down into the pool in the beginning of the movie to grab bricks, this could be a reference to the process of making Tyrian purple from the mucus of sea snails. And not that I think, they might have dived down to get them, but I don't think that's how they got them. But I say this because, like, in the beginning of the movie, there's a reference to how they're like when they're in the beginning of the movie, Johnny Utah and Angelo Papas are watching, the FBI agents are watching film of the bank robbers, and they say, oh, they're really professional. And they note how they separate the ink bag from the money, right? And I interpret this that the Bodhi character and a surfer crew know how to make this Tyrian purple, right? This kind of, they know how to separate the ink, right, from the money. Thus, they're kind of like, if you understand that, they are kind of like breaking up the monopoly of the Tyrian Phoenicians, right, who were the ones who made or known for making the Tyrian purple, and they've kind of guarded that secret, and it's the way they made money. And you can see how, like, the surfer gang, they're kind of like these people who come and they steal the money, or they understand the way to make the money. And it's also, you can understand it through the U.S. government, that Johnny Utah ultimately represents or works for the government. He represents kind of like this FBI. And they're kind of protecting this royal tenor, their money, or this like patent of how to make money, right? This Tyrian purple. And again, it's Artemis who ends up, right, because you could say that banking is kind of like the Tyrian. It's like a way to make money, right? It's like their new way to make money. And the FBI protects that. And again, it's Artemis who ends up killing Orion because he said he was a better hunter than her, or something to that effect. And it's like Tyler who ends up getting Bodhi killed, and his whole surfer crew, right, after finding out that Johnny is working for the FBI and kind of lied to her. So, to read further from Apollodorus, but Orion was killed, as some say, for challenging Artemis to a match at quoits, or I think it's something like horseshoes. But some say he was shot by Artemis for offering violence to Opis one of the maidens who had come from the Hyperboreans. Poseidon wedded Amphitrite, daughter of Ocean, and there were born to him Triton and Rhode, who was married to the sun. And this is like in Genesis 38, where Judah once again sleeps with Tamar, who's like Tyler, who in Greek is kind of like Danaira or Artemis, these kind of like feisty girl figures. And they end up figuring out the truth of this kind of sexual encounter, right? They've kind of been, they were blinded and they were kind of unblinded. In a sense, they want revenge and they're really feisty about it. And some people end up dying kind of in the crossfire. And when Judah saw, so let's read from Genesis 38. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she said. "I'll send you a young goat for my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who's beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her, because the men who lived there said, 'There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here.'" Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you can recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I am, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah," and he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist, and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out," and he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. So, like, Tyler, who finds out Judah's working for the FBI by finding his badge or the seal, right, and thus figuring out he lied to her about being an orphan, and he's kind of like a fucked up person, right? He lies about his parents dying and just his identity in general, right? She flips out about it. And it's like Tamar, who used the pledge of Judah, his scepter and his seal and his cord, effectively this FBI badge to reveal his identity. And it's just kind of like this symbol that, it's a symbol, it's just a physical symbol of this recognition, right, of this unblinding. And at the end of the Genesis 38, Tamar gives birth to Perez, which means to break out, like the name of the movie Point Break, or this breaking point where Judah or Johnny Utah throws down his badge. At the end of a movie, right, he throws down his badge, and it's won. He throws it down because he's been successful, right? He doesn't have anything left to do. He's chased off this, like, pack of blonde-haired surfers, like, who can sustain themselves by stealing money from the U.S. government, or, like, they can live off just this life of pure poetry to surf the wave and gain immortality in that. But also, Johnny Utah throws it down kind of because he suffers, right? He quits. He's reached his breaking point. He's been split. He's kind of divided, right? He's to have mixed emotions. He's using alcohol as a medium for guidance through this suffering. He's getting high on his own supply, basically. He's broken his kosher rules. He feels for Bodhi. He's jealous of Apollo, and he's this beautiful fate he has achieved. He wants to be Apollonian, this young, poetic, energetic, selfish to a bit, but ultimately a princely manner. This princely type, right, to combine with Poseidon, this virile, chaotic force to gain legendary status, right, to not fret in life, that understand that it comes in cycles, these waves, and to plan accordingly and wait for your time. And even more so, right, to have kids combined with Poseidon. Poseidon and Apollo don't fight each other in the Iliad, right? Neptune is the uncle of Apollo, right? And likewise, Apollo the nephew. And together, they fortify walls, they build towns. Conversely, Poseidon has a dark side, right? He reveals our greatest fears. He blinds us. He torments and pummels us to leave us sick to our stomach like we've had too much wine. And that's probably the biggest takeaway, is that we can let others languish. Biggest takeaway is that we can't let others languish either, right? And the best way to provide inspiration is not to be this kind of Dionysian or suffer with everyone or try to save people. It's to be Apollonian. It's kind of to kill ourselves. It's to live this tragic life, right? To provide inspiration, to be the poet. And Ceres or Achilles, right, is the brightest star in the sky, right? Likewise, Apollo is the brightest star in the day sky, and the symbol of the solar year. And Orion, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.